People really fucking hate the Fire Emblem characters in the Smash Bros. Series. Some think that no one plays the series, so they're overrepresented, some hate the anime designs, some think their movesets are uninspired, and some are crazy people who send death threats to a movie studio the second they make a woman into a lead. Don't even mention the name Brie Larson, unless you want 12 sweaty men busting down your door, katanas in hand. Why are people so heated about this franchise having so much representation in this fighting game? Let's go back to the beginning, see if we can't trace this anger to its source. Alright, 1999, we were graced with Smash 64 in all its blocky glory. It didn't feature a single Fire Emblem character, but this actually wasn't the initial plan. Sakurai has gone on record stating that he wanted to include Marth in the game, but couldn't due to time constraints. He also mentions that the only reason they had enough time to include the 4 secret characters, Jigglypuff, Luigi, Ness, and Captain Falcon, was because they were able to reuse some assets from pre-existing characters to speed up development. Which is interesting considering what we have today with the Fire Emblem characters.
Oh my goodness!
Anyway, fast forward a couple years to 2001, and we get the first appearances of Marth and Roy in Melee. Marth was added as general representation for Fire Emblem, which was and still is a massive franchise in Japan, while Roy was added for some additional content that had the added benefit of promoting The Binding Blade, Roy's game, which hadn't come out yet. Roy, like the secret characters in Smash 64, was cobbled together using assets from other characters, specifically Marth. Melee would popularize this trend as people started to become more aware of clones, something that the Fire Emblem reps would get heavily criticized for down the road. Now, Melee came out during a time when the internet and social media weren't as commonplace as they are now, so there's not as much information on how people reacted to the inclusion of Marth and Roy, but generally speaking, it was more of a, "Who?" And Roy was actually almost cut because of this. Nintendo of America was concerned about the reaction to the Fire Emblem characters because of how little a presence the series had overseas, so there were talks of removing the character for the North American release, but ultimately he stayed in because they thought he'd be fun. Fast forward to 2008 and the release of Brawl, where we saw the inclusion of Ike, who was added mostly to promote the Fire Emblem game Radiant Dawn. The weird thing here is that Ike could have been literally anyone. Like, he could have been anyone. According to Sakurai, Ike started as a blank character design with the moveset of a slow and powerful swordsman. All he knew was that he wanted to have a strong sword boy, and he also wanted a new Fire Emblem rep at some point. So, after talking with the Fire Emblem guys, it was decided that Ike would fill that blank character void. And this really makes me wonder about what other fighters started as a moveset instead of a character. Like Captain Falcon for sure, right? He definitely is just a Smash original fighter at this point. Also, why didn't you just give Ganondorf the slow and powerful, strong swordsman moveset you had? We had to wait till Ultimate for that? I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, people didn't really care about Ike's inclusion either, just like Marth and Roy. Smash was starting to approach the zone of too many Fire Emblem characters, but Blue Man Group over here had a relatively unique moveset, if you don't count the staple down B counter. And this does make sense, considering he started as only a moveset, and had Ike crudely glued onto him. We then come to 2014 and Smash 4, which is where things started to get a little ridiculous. In the Wii U and 3DS games, we saw the inclusion of Lucina, Robin, and later, Corrin. That's 3 Fire Emblem characters in one game. Oh boy. Lucina and Robin were announced at the same time, both of which being included to promote Fire Emblem Awakening, which had come out around the time Sakurai was planning the upcoming Smash title. Now, there's some discourse on whether or not this is actually true. The idea that Robin, Lucina, and many more Fire Emblem characters were added to promote their home games. Sakurai said himself, "It's not as if we have a stipulation that says we have to include the protagonist of the next Fire Emblem game." But a lot of his language on how and why the Fire Emblem characters were included outside of that one quote seems counter to that. But I'll let you believe what you want to believe. Corrin was later added as one of the 2 final DLC characters for Smash 4, along with Bayonetta. Corrin was added shortly before the North American release of their debut game, Fire Emblem Fates, which might add a little fuel to that we don't have to include the protagonist of the new Fire Emblem game fire. I'm just saying, I believe what you want. Either way, people weren't too happy. Not only did Smash 4 include 3 new Fire Emblem representatives, one was a clone of Marth, one played pretty similarly to the other existing Fire Emblem reps, and the other was Robin. They're fine, I guess. I personally hate playing as them, but at least they're, different. I even remember Fire Emblem fans themselves being a little ticked off at this point. They wanted more unique characters like Lyn or Tharja, but instead received the generic protagonists of the 2 most recent games, and a literal descendant of one of the pre-existing representatives. At least Bayonetta tempered some of the outrage toward Corrin, since she was released at the same time as they were. Moving forward to 2018 with Ultimate, which, at least at launch, only had the one small Fire Emblem character in the Echo Fighter, Kromm. Kromm was one of the long-requested Fire Emblem reps that was included for that reason alone. He was even teased back in Robin and Lucina's reveal, which was another reason Fire Emblem fans were pissed by that particular reveal. Sakurai's a troll, we all know this. But hey, Fire Emblem fans got something they had been wanting for years. He's a weird amalgamation of a few other characters chocked together, but at least he's here, right? The straw that broke the camel's back, however, was Byleth. Byleth was included as post-launch DLC in early 2020, and people were probably the most outraged they had ever been by their inclusion. Ultimate had its DLC handled differently than Smash 4's. 5 of the first 6 DLC fighters were distributed through the Fighter's Pass, which was a glorified pre-order for the 5 upcoming characters. Byleth was the last one on this pass. This pissed people off for a few reasons. The first is that, obviously, people are going to go into the last reveal with the mantra of save the best for last, and with a roster that includes Joker, Hero, Banjo-Kazooie, and Terry, all characters from third-party franchises, one of which is fucking Banjo-Kazooie, one of the top requested fighters of all time, your hopes are going to be pretty high. This was immediately undercut with the reveal of Byleth, who not only isn't a third-party character, but is another representative in an already overrepresented franchise. And it wasn't simply the lineup all being third-party characters that made people believe that's how the entire pass was gonna go. Nintendo essentially confirmed this back at Joker's reveal, who, for those that don't know, Joker was the very first person on the Fighter's Pass. He was revealed the day the game came out. There was a lot of hype leading up to Byleth's reveal, is what I'm saying. Anyway, Reggie spoke about Sakurai's approach to the DLC, saying this: "It's emblematic of the approach that Mr. Sakurai and the team are taking with the DLC. He wants characters that are unique, different, to bring them into the Smash Bros. Environment. So it's going to be tremendously exciting. Mr. Sakurai, he's not only a student of Nintendo franchises, and obviously he's had his hand in a few, but he's a student of video games from a total perspective. And so he's been the driver in really thinking about what type of character coming into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate would bring just a whole different level of fun and enjoyment for the player. That's been the approach. That's the thinking." Reggie basically told us that the Fighter's Pass would be filled with third-party characters exclusively. So for that alone, seeing Byleth as the final inclusion on that list was supremely disappointing. It is possible that Byleth wasn't always planned to be the 5th fighter on the first pass, however. Curiously, in that same Smash Direct, the second previously announced Fighter's Pass had a 6th slot added to it. Perhaps Byleth was a relatively last-minute inclusion, and the actual 5th fighter will be the first of the second pass? Food for thought. So, that's a lot to take in history-wise. It seems that people became increasingly more annoyed with the inclusion of all these sword-wielding anime men over time. What started in Smash as a couple reps for a relatively big Japanese gaming franchise has spiraled out of control into the second most represented series, trailing behind Mario and tied with Pokemon, depending on how you count it. Things aren't ever so simple though. Fans aren't only upset about the number of Fire Emblem reps Smash has. If that were the case, then there would be plenty of outrage toward the aforementioned Mario and Pokemon fighters. There are 2 other reasons that people, myself included, dislike the inclusion of so many Fire Emblem fighters in Smash. Let's start with their visual designs. Take a look at all the Fire Emblem fighters. Now I'm gonna dye all their hair blue. Uh-oh. The anime art style, love it or hate it, is a very strong influence on the design philosophy of Fire Emblem's characters, and this has never been more apparent than in Smash. These fighters all share a lot of similar characteristics. The eyes, the clothes, the swords, the colors, the hair. Shit is all the same. And don't get me wrong here, this isn't inherently a bad thing. If your characters all live in the same universe, they probably should share similar design facets, but boy, when you clash these designs against the rest of the roster, it is rough. In the context of the Fire Emblem games, these designs work. The difference between characters is more subtle than it is in, say, Star Fox, where each character looks like an entirely different species. But if I'm honest, I don't even know if Fire Emblem does stick to that idea of subtlety being key. All of the Fire Emblem fighters in Smash look pretty similar, sure, but the rest of the Fire Emblem cast doesn't really abide by that. Look at these guys. I don't know if they're important, but they sure seem to be based on their designs. So maybe this guy? But at least he's got some cool chunky armor. My man straight looking like Cannonbolt. If characters like Valadar or Walhart were included instead of, say, Lucina or Corrin, I think people would be far less annoyed by the sameness of these designs. And you know, there's a reason that the fighters we ended up with all look super similar. It's not some coincidence or a fault of Fire Emblem character design as a whole. The reason is because they're all the protagonists of their respective home games. Protagonists in a lot of RPGs are designed to act as a host for the player, a shell of a design that the player can imprint onto. This is why Robin, Corrin, and Byleth have male and female options. The goal is to make the design of the characters you'll have the most intimate relationships with appeal to the most amount of people. It's why the non-player characters, or even some of the playable ones, have more out-there designs. When designing those guys, the designers aren't constrained by the protagonist limitation. And frankly, this works in RPGs. I love starting from a blank slate that I can then mold into my own with character creation or a robust clothing system. The problem is that the designs at their core aren't meant to be visually distinct enough to stand out in a crowd. Because of this, people start to get annoyed at the Fire Emblem reps being so plentiful in Smash because they all look like they're the same character with a few slight tweaks. People aren't generally bothered by the amount of Pokemon in the game because each one is so visually different from one another that there's no burnout on the designs. And on top of that, they don't get lost in a frenzy when you're fighting with all of them at once. Take a look at this nonsense! Fuck is even happening here? This is another huge reason that the Fire Emblem representation needs a reworking. Because they look and move so similarly, it can become really tough to identify who's who in a big fight. Silhouettes are extremely important in games. They're really important with character design in general, really. It is essential in a game that you can identify a character at a glance without having to double take or study certain movements. Overwatch, Team Fortress 2, League of Legends, and even Smash most of the time are great examples of games that have incredibly unique silhouettes that make it very clear who's who at any given time. This subject has been covered to death for good reason. In a game that can host up to 8 fighters on the screen at once, it's crazy that this many characters slipped in with silhouettes that are almost identical. Even if you're not fighting in a big battle, which I'm sure a lot of you aren't, 1v1s, they're not that much better. Especially for the spectator, a match like Marth vs. Byleth, or God forbid, Byleth vs. Byleth, will get incredibly confusing incredibly quickly. I can see this as a huge problem for spectators that aren't intimately familiar with the game, or even commentators who have to be speaking a mile a minute and are juggling a bunch of things at once. And I'll throw a dog a bone here. Humanoid silhouettes themselves are pretty difficult to make unique. This is apparent with Fire Emblem, but there are ways around the roadblock of having to stick to realistic anatomy. The downfall of these designs is that they're pretty much all dude with a sword, with no extra flourishes to make them distinct. Link's got a sword, but he stands out thanks to his shield and sometimes his hat. Zelda has her big floofy dress. Little Mac is short and usually hunched over. Samus has her sharp armor and cannon thingy. The list goes on. It's not impossible to make a striking humanoid silhouette. The visual designs of the Fire Emblem characters we got in Smash just don't work very well. Not only are they lukewarm in comparison to their own game's other characters, but they're incredibly samey to themselves, especially when stacked up against most of the other Smash fighters. But visuals aren't everything. Each Fire Emblem rep has a sword glued to their hand, and boy does this inform their movesets. Most Smash fighters are distinct from one another with their playstyles. Sure, there are clones and echoes and whatever, but most of the time if a new character is introduced, you're going to get a uniquely fun moveset to come along with them. I personally want 2 things out of a new fighter: a unique design paired with an innovative moveset. It's cool when they bring a new franchise into the fray or a long-awaited character, but that's usually icing on the cake, especially in the case of longevity. Smash is a game that's designed to be played forever, so the novelty of a character looking cool or them being from a fancy new series will eventually fizzle out. It's like if you bought a chair made out of keyboards. Sure, it looks cool, I guess, but eventually you're going to realize that it's not that comfortable and you're going to stop sitting in it. Not only do the swordmen not have unique enough designs to draw me to them in the first place, their movesets are so incestuous that they all end up feeling like tiny variations on the same character idea. And this isn't exactly a terrible concept, a bunch of characters with small variations for the sake of expanding a character roster and adding a little more complexity. This was the design philosophy behind Roy, the original secret characters, and all the clones/echoes. The problem is that the Fire Emblem characters' lack of major gameplay changes aren't balanced out with fun designs like that of Young Link or Dark Samus. And besides, if you're gonna make a new character for the sake of buffing the roster, don't tote them as some new major addition to the cast. All that'll do is create disappointment and ill will toward the dev team, which has never been more apparent with these characters. Look at the direct where Hero was revealed. That potentially divisive reveal was countered by the universally anticipated reveal of Banjo and Kazooie. Hero likely would have gotten way more heat if the Baron Bird weren't there to calm everyone down. We saw the same thing back when Corrin was revealed alongside Bayonetta. The Smash devs are clearly aware of the reputation that the Fire Emblem fighters have at this point. Honestly, if I may be so bold here, half the Fire Emblem cast just feel like glorified costumes. It's like if Hero or Bowser Jr.'s alts were split up into individual characters with minor variations to their frame data and were each released with a trailer and a Smash Direct dedicated to them. People would be pissed. I guess unless you're a Dragon Quest or Bowser Jr. stan. I would love it if Marth, Roy, Lucina, and Kromm were all one fighter. Lucina was literally supposed to be a costume for Marth before she got slight changes and became her own thing, so there's for sure precedent there. And obviously this shouldn't happen now, but in a potential future Smash game where the roster is being cut back for whatever reason, this would be a fun idea. You keep the character representation without bloating the roster with samey movesets. Also, Echo Fighters, you should just be costumes, like stop. That was a mistake. That term makes no sense. Just be costumes, please. I do want to give credit where it's due though. The other half of the Fire Emblem cast has taken steps in the right direction, albeit baby steps. Robin and Corrin are probably the most distinct, Corrin less so, but I'll take what I can get. Byleth can also kind of count in this category, but honestly they're just such a wasted opportunity in my eyes. Byleth's whole thing seems to be their use of the different weapon types that Fire Emblem has to offer, so I thought it'd be super cool to have Byleth switch between 3 unique movesets, each one corresponding to a different weapon type. And hey, that might sound like a lot for one character, but Exhibit A, Pokemon Trainer. Fans of Smash Bros. Are upset by the continuing inclusion of characters from the Fire Emblem series not only because of the sheer amount of them, but also because they fly in the face of the core design facets of fighting games. Characters in fighting games should be designed with 2 things in mind. Each character needs a compelling visual, along with a unique playstyle. Most of the fighters in Smash Bros. Abide by these rules, with the glaring exception of the Fire Emblem representatives, who borrow movesets and visuals from each other like one big, boring family. At the end of the day, Smash is great, anime sword gang or not. I think it's fun to speculate on and discuss these things. Smash has this strange ability to incite incredible passion in its fans, which leads to discourse like this. I'm of an ilk that really enjoys talking about media in this way, and there is so much to say when it comes to Smash. Like, everyone's got an opinion on this damn game. I have a certain fondness for the Fire Emblem characters at this point. I've never played one of their games, and don't particularly care for their designs, but some of them are fun to play. And frankly, our opinions on these fighters, they don't really matter. We're gonna get the characters that Sakurai and or Nintendo wants in the game, and we've gotta live with that. Of course, we have every right to criticize these decisions, but it should be done with tact. Don't send death threats to the people who are working tirelessly night and day to make your precious video games, you hooligans. I, and you, might think the Fire Emblem fighters suck and are full of wasted potential, but ultimately, they're a drop in the bucket. Smash is chock full of some of the best characters in gaming, and we have the privilege of pitting them against one another in one of the best fighting games around. So let's move away from the Marths, and focus more on the Marios, the Links, the Kirbys, the Pikachus, and be grateful that we get to experience such a wonderful franchise made by such talented people. That's it for me, talking about all these blue-haired boys. But I had a lot more to say about this than I thought I did. Like I said, everyone's got an opinion on Smash. At the end of the day, it's good shit. It's good shit. It brings people together, and it's a nice time. Please don't report this video as hate speech. If you do, I'll find you and call you names.